Our report is full of stories from people who encountered this treatment, as well as photos that capture the unforgettable scene of those 2 days. For the first time, we used social media in our investigation.
My issue here today is for the safety and the security of the 2.3 million people in this city that I run as a candidate to represent. $920 million have been spent to put a fence around, create jobs, and to protect 20 wannabe world leaders.
The new mayor, who took office Wednesday, also defended Toronto police for their actions during last summer's G20.
Personally, if you didn't want to be down there, you shouldn't have been down there.
Good afternoon. The Ombudsman confirmed what the people of the City of Toronto already knew, that Dalton McGuinty passed a law that he knew or should have known was illegal and unconstitutional. The McGuinty government not only went out of their way to avoid the democratic process, a democratic debate, they deliberately kept the facts about their illegal and unconstitutional measures from the public. In fact, the last comments that the Ombudsman made, one of the last comments that he made, I will repeat. When Pierre Trudeau invoked the War Measures Act, there was full and open debate, and the public was fully informed about the suspension of their civil liberties. When Dalton McGuinty invoked the Public Works Protection Act, there was no debate. There was no public discussion, and the facts were hidden from the people the government is supposed to represent. We'll continue to demand that full public inquiry. The Ombudsman said himself that his scope was narrow, and in that narrow scope, look at the explosive report that he's put before us today. The lack of participation by the Chief of Police is disturbing, there's no doubt. In fact, there's real concern around the tail wagging the dog, asking for the government to pass a regulation that gives the police more powers, and then the government simply acquiescing to that request. So there's a number of problems in that chain of events, and many people need to be held accountable. It's my job to make sure that the Premier is held accountable and that the Minister in charge is held accountable, and that's certainly what we're going to continue to do.
You said that the tail wagged the dog. Do you mean that the provincial government kowtowed to the police?
That's certainly what this report indicates. That the request, I think what the Ombudsman said is that the request for the regulation can be traced directly back to the office of the Chief of Police of Toronto. It seems to me that that's exactly what happened. That the request was made and the government acquiesced, and as a result, people's civil liberties in this city were trounced upon. In a democracy, the government makes the laws, and law enforcement enforces those laws. It's a bit backwards, if you ask me. And the last time I checked, we're actually a democracy here in the province of Ontario. The government could have played this a lot differently than they did. In fact, other law enforcement agencies, other members of the Integrated Securities Unit didn't want to see this particular piece of legislation invoked, from my understanding of the reading of this report. They were not interested. They didn't think they needed any extra powers. Well, if the RCMP didn't think they needed any extra powers, and the OPP didn't think they needed any extra powers, and the military didn't think they needed any extra powers, why did the government of Ontario?
Do you have any comments on the Ombudsman's recommendation number 1 on the idea of revising or replacing the Public Works Protection Act?
Well, the Ombudsman has indicated his pleasure that the government is actually going to implement the recommendations. We await the government's move on recommendation number 1 with relish.
The only way to bring about real change is to change government. Now, Ontario PC leader Tim Hudak will speak to the findings of the Ombudsman report.
Well, thank you very much, Garfield, my critic for public safety, community safety, and security. We're not going to let this go. You know, quite frankly, this attempt to bring forward an illegal law and to keep it secret from the public and to have a communications campaign where the whole purpose was to bury the facts is deceitful and is cowardly. There's only one person that needs to answer questions, and that's Premier McGuinty himself. This is his cabinet. This is his cabinet minister. It was his staff involved in an attempt to try to cover up the facts from the public. Minister Bartolucci should do the honorable thing. And because Minister Bartolucci actively participated in an attempt to cover up this law, he should resign from cabinet. And if I were Premier and a minister did not do so, I'd fire that minister from cabinet. With respect to Chief Blair, right, he's accountable to the Toronto Police Services Board. I'm sure they'll be responding to this report in their own manner. But the reality is, the buck stops at the province. No matter what the police may have asked for, the province is there to say if it's right or wrong. And if they believe that extraordinary measures are necessary, then find a way to do so that's constitutional. It was the Premier who allowed this to go through cabinet. It was Premier McGuinty who allowed his ministers to try to cover it up. And it was Premier McGuinty who allowed for weeks and weeks on end for this actual change in the law, illegal and unconstitutional, to be buried. The buck stops at the Premier's desk, and it is a dramatic failure of leadership and deceitful. Who's going to be held accountable? Right? You had a minister of the Crown and a Premier giving him the wink and the nod that brought forward an illegal and unconstitutional law and then conspired, had an actual communications plan to keep it secret from the general public. I want to know who's going to be accountable. I want to know when the minister is going to be forced to resign, and I want the Premier to come clean with all of the details. You know, I think that our frontline police officers had to cope with some extraordinary circumstances. I mean, we all know that thugs and hooligans will come from across Canada, across North America, around the world, just for the sole purpose of creating mayhem, just for destroying property and taunting our police officers. And I think our frontline police officers did their best under extraordinary circumstances, people that are just trying to bait them. They weren't here to protest. They weren't here to raise some issue in some corner of the world. The people we saw on TV, many of the thugs and hooligans that were burning up police cars, destroying property, came with one purpose in mind, and that was to create mayhem and chaos. Let's not lose sight of that.
My conclusion today, my finding is that the government planned and premeditated not to communicate what authority it was relying on to execute searches, to arbitrarily detain citizens. And that, in my view, is problematic.
Andre, in finding number 40, you talk about the actual day on Saturday of the riots that we all kind of saw and experienced, in that there was a 45-minute black window where the ISU couldn't get a hold of Toronto police. They spent a fortune on communication. Did you find out, one, where Toronto police went during that time? And then you also allude to RCMP officers left the nation's capital bare as they trekked south to provide assistance in Toronto. How grave is that, and what's the context of that statement?
Well, it's not this was provided because it came up during an investigation. I think it was proper narrative for us to review that in terms of providing you with a complete picture of the confusion that day. And part of the confusion that day, I think, can be drawn right down to the existence and the reliance on that 1939 piece of legislation nobody was aware of. There's mass confusion that could have been dealt with up front.
Word up, this is Daniel over here. We're here at Queen's Park, and we're in the front of Queen's Park, and I just heard the Ombudsman's report, and I found there's at least one protester out here still looking for a public inquiry here. Do you mind introducing yourself?
My name is Jefferson Aribu. I'm a criminology major from the University of Ottawa.
Why are you out here?
Well, I've been actually out in front of the police station quite a bit lately. Basically, my fight is not against the police officers. That's one thing that people need to understand. I'm actually with the police. That's why I've studied police studies for many years. I think that a large percentage of police officers are great cops. A small percentages here are being protected, and obviously I'm not sure why, but I have my ideas. Because of that, our police force is being unfairly stigmatized, and they're all looking bad. So I think we need an inquiry. We've got to get to the bottom of who did what. and you can't sweep it under the rug. Bill Blair can't come out and say everything's fine, nothing happened, we reviewed the tapes, and we're exonerating all police officers because we can't identify them. Well, they had no problem identifying the black blocs with their facial recognition software that they paid millions and millions of dollars for. And anyhow, like as you can see, it's a very long story. I'm fighting the fight for people. For kids. I had a lot of kids out here that wanted to know about what democracy was today, and like I said, my message is positive. It's not negative. I believe in our government, and I believe in Canada. I think it's a great country, and I appreciate you know, what you and your station do for us. So
yeah, thanks, man. We're in an interesting location to be talking about this, because this right here in Queen's Park was one of the scenes, epic scenes of the G20, where you know, the whole park was supposed to be the free speech zone, and it was cleared out of people. Were you actually in Toronto during the G20? Or did you see any of what was going on? Were you protesting?
That's the odd thing. I wasn't out here during the G20. I was out of town during that weekend. Like I said, I've done a lot of protest after that. But like I said, it's all on YouTube. I mean, I'm talking with Sean Salvati, who's a very documented case. I read the Adam Nobody case. Like, everything is on YouTube, and you know, I just want the truth to come out, and these people need closure. You have to understand that these 1,000 people that were arrested suffered a lot of mental trauma, and that's a fact. What happened to them? This is a very terrible thing that was done to them, and if they get this closure, they can also, you know, I'm sure they can recover from that. Just like a lot of police officers, I believe, suffered a lot of mental trauma from the things that they see, the atrocities they saw in those prison camps. And everything is recorded. Nobody's gotten to see these videos yet. I think a lot of these police officers are not getting a lot of support because it's something that they say, you know, you're being weak if you come along and say, hey, I've been affected by what I did or what I saw done to people. We're all good people. This is, like I said, this is a great country, Canada, and let's go back to our roots. You know, this law today with the ombudsman. That's why I'm here today. This is a 60-year-old law passed after World War II. You know. It was just kind of thrown in there last second to us, so a lot of the population did not know, you know, what exactly was going on, and the law was clearly broken.
When a regulation is passed, there are technical elements to passing a regulation. The very strict, narrow, technical requirements. In other words, it has to be permitted by legislation, which in this case, I would add, was not permitted by legislation, because the legislation is for the protection of infrastructure, yet the regulation is passed to protect people. Well, that's another issue. But then the regulation has to be signed by X number of ministers and then published in a certain way, and the technical requirements of the Act were met. However, the practical requirements is when you have peaceful demonstrators and civil liberties organizations that are gathering and want to know the extent of the powers that the police will be invoking to ensure the security at the G20, it seems to me those people should have been told, we will be relying on this 1939 Act. They were not told that. This Act was not publicized. It was not in any of the ads that were published. And the problem with it is that by not putting it, it didn't allow protesters to challenge the authority.
If there are constitutional implications, why invoke something that you don't understand?
Well, what was misunderstood was the boundaries. And Evan, let me also be clear. If you go back to the press conference on Friday when I spoke of that, I had gone online and I downloaded a copy off of ELAW's, a copy of that regulation. When asked by a reporter about the boundaries, I gave him a copy of that legislation and said, here is the regulation that articulates the boundaries, so he could read it himself.
But for Bill Blair to deny speaking to people, he has no problem with coming out in front of the media and displaying weapons that were used at the G20. One of them was a rubber sword that he picked up off some guy going to a D&D convention. I mean, stop making a farce of it. So let's get a public inquiry and we'll get some answers, you know? We'll see the videotapes. The videotape's all there. There was actually a camera in front of the police station that was there when I started protesting, and all of a sudden it's not there anymore. So I find that very interesting that that police station camera was taken down, you know? So anyhow, that's you know, it's a long story, but we'll get there. And like I said, I might be one guy out here, but there's 60,000 people on Facebook on this G20 site protest, and there's a lot of people walking by me, giving me the thumbs up, honking for me. I'm getting a lot of support from people, and a lot of people are walking up and telling me their story of what happened to them, and the fact that they can't get justice because, like I said, police are investigating police, and I mean, where's that going to get us? You know, it's incredible. Anyhow. Yeah.
For real, yeah. Thanks a lot for your words today. December 2010, calling for the public inquiry into the G20, police abuses. Word up, word out.